Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar, which is brought to you by Teagasc. My name is Pat Murphy, Head of Environment Knowledge Transfer. And this morning I'm delighted to be joined by two colleagues. Mairead Whitty is the project lead with the Farming for Water EIP, which has been established over the last year. And Eimear Connery is an ASSAP advisor with Teagasc operating in Cork, but has been working closely with the Farming for Water EIP over the last year. You're very welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Pat.
I'm also joined for questions by Cathal Summer. So Cathal, you're very welcome.
Morning, Pat.
Back in 2018, the ASSAP service was established, and when it, I suppose, began operations, it worked with farmers to try and encourage them to take on measures to improve water quality in priority areas for action. So generally areas where water quality was challenged. However, in that job, there was one big challenge that faced the advisors, and that was potentially the lack of funding to deal with maybe some of the more costly measures that were being proposed. So a request to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage for potential funding yielded what has now become the Farming for Water EIP, where they committed 60 million to support those actions in those priority areas for actions and in other priority areas where we're trying to work on water quality. That's the background. Mairead, you're going to give us a further background to the program and to the establishment of the program and give us an idea of how it works. And Eimear then will follow on with some detailed examples of the measures that may be applied for and potentially some examples to give people a flavour of what an application might look like. Yeah. So if you can share your presentation, Mairead.
Okay, just to give you a bit of background, we talk about the Farming for Water EIP. So what exactly is an EIP? So it's co-funded by the EU and the Government of Ireland through the two departments, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And it brings together farmers, scientists and other experts to work together to test out new practices. So it's road testing ideas and practices that can be adopted more widely. And that's what it's all about. Pat went through the kind of background, so I'll just touch on this very quickly. So the process that was in place, as you mentioned, from 2018 was that LawPro, who I work for, do a catchment assessment. They look at the various water bodies and what is impacting on them. And where they identify a particular pressure, they refer to the pressure owner. So where agriculture is identified as the particular pressure, they send a referral to the ASSAP programme and to those advisors who will then engage farmers in that area and go out and do a farm-based assessment to look at water quality issues and what is actually happening on the farm. And that covers a multitude, but one of the things highlighted in that are supplementary measures, so measures that go over and above compliance. But as Pat mentioned, that review identified that the implementation of those supplementary measures had been hampered by a lack of funding. So obviously people were sorting out their compliance issues first, which is natural, and then the lack of funding hampered those supplementary measures. So the Farming for Water EIP came into being. So 60 million euro of an agri-environmental scheme for farmers. It runs to the end of 2027. 50 million euro of that is ring-fenced for payments for farmers to cover the cost of those supplementary measures. And that is through the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and co-funded by the EU. And then the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage are putting up the 10 million euro for the operational costs. So to put in the processes, staffing, and all the procedures around the implementation of the scheme and the running of that scheme. It's managed by LawPro in partnership with Teagasc and Dairy Industry Ireland. And it's the final step of that ASSAP process. So it's building on the ASSAP structure that's there and the advisory team that's there and coming in at the end with funding to implement those supplementary measures. The aim is to engage up to 15,000 farmers. Now, the project is focused on water quality, but there's also co-benefits that can be brought into play for a lot of those nature-based solution measures, looking at biodiversity and the likes of climate actions. Eligibility then, it's a targeted approach, so it's not an open call. The focus is on areas where water quality needs to be restored. So 50 million euro in funding is a lot of money, but at the same time, it's a national scheme. So spread nationally, it can get very small very quickly. So we need to focus where that funding is going. So the focus is the second cycle and third cycle priority areas for action where agriculture has been identified as that significant pressure. And the farms in those areas will be assessed to see where there's a requirement for measures. So there might be a farm in the area that doesn't require those measures. And we're also looking at the nitrate vulnerable areas in the southeast and trying to bring in all dairy farmers in those areas. The project was launched in March of this year on the farm of David and Roisin Fay near Lough Ennell by Minister McConlogue, Minister Noonan and Senator Hackett. And the reason that location was chosen was because through the ASSAP programme, there had been previously measures installed, very similar to the measures that we're offering, and those measures had brought about a water quality improvement. There's a number of focus areas of the project, localised information, so letting farmers know exactly what's happening in their local water body, bringing it home to them and their local area. Understanding what measures are needed. So understanding, okay, I've recommended this. Why have I recommended this? What is this combating? And what's it going to do for water quality? Bringing training into it then and training farmers up on best practice so that they can, when they're making decisions in the future, they know, well, what good looks like. Promotion as well. So we're looking at, I suppose, highlighting where good practice is in place, where people have done an awful lot of work for water quality and where it has had an impact. So I suppose highlighting the positive things in an agricultural setting. We're building on community-led initiatives. As part of the project team, we're going to be bringing in 5 community animators. So these will be roles embedded in existing groups that have a water quality focus. So the likes of the Rivers Trusts, and building on the work that they have done already in the network that they have in place. Measures then, obviously, sector-wide adoption of best practice measures. So we've selected 43 measures within the scheme, and we'll be trying to get those implemented where appropriate. Validation of those measures. So we've a research hub set up that I'll discuss further later on. And then the knowledge transfer. So the reporting side of it. And that's, I suppose, the whole point of the project is to road test those measures and how effective that they are. So carrying out that reporting to inform policy. One of the innovations of the project then is the rainwater management plan. And this is the only mandatory measure that we have in the scheme. And this is essentially a collaborative effort between the farmer and the advisor. The advisor comes out with the science-based approach, the referral from Law Pro where it's available, but then talks to the farmer and sees, well, what's actually happened on the ground. So we have a study here that has identified these as pressures, well, but what is actually impacting the farm? So looking at then what's the most appropriate measure for those risks. And the rainwater management plan looks at where the water moves across the farmyard to highlight those risky areas and identify what can be put in to combat that risk. And the measures then, as I mentioned, we have 43 measures, and Eimear will go into a bit more detail on some of these measures, but they're generally broken into source control measures, pathway interceptor measures, and receptor measures. So obviously the type of measures that will be implemented on a farm will depend on the pressure that's there, the land that's there, the soil type, the farm practice that's being carried out in the area. So each application is bespoke to the farm in question. I mentioned then our research hub, and this is part of the innovation. Our validation will be done through the research hub. So we have researchers brought together in a group from many different institutions. Some of them are listed there, UCD, UCC, and including the Teagasc ACP programme. So the researchers, it's a mutually beneficial arrangement whereby the researchers will have access to our sites and will be able to build their research projects around the measures that will be put in place. They can then use that access and ability to access sites to support applications for funding and other funding streams supported by the project. So it just means that then that 50 million euro in funding goes directly to farmers to fund the cost of installing these measures. We'll also be looking at some internal monitoring and testing to bridge gaps in validation. And they first met in May, so that's an ongoing process there. Progress highlights then, I suppose we've done an awful lot of work in the project. We initially started last year with pilots. The project then was launched in May. So we have 43 measures that covers all the various pressures. We also have a bespoke option. So we're very conscious of the fact that I suppose every farm is different. We've tried to cover all the scenarios, but we want to leave the project open for innovation. So if a farmer has a good idea or a group of farmers have an idea that can have a water quality benefit, we can look at that under a bespoke option. So we've road tested those measures and we've road tested our process, and we've made some amendments based on the farmer and the advisor feedback. So this is slightly different from maybe departmental schemes where the structure is quite rigid. Initially, in our case, we had the flexibility to make those changes because we want to make it workable for the farmer and workable for the advisors. We've developed our specification document and guidance on that. As I mentioned, we've done a number of different pilots, including a tillage pilot in the southeast, in the ACP catchment there in Castle. So we'll be bringing in the monitoring aspect of that through the ACP and the research hub. The project, I suppose, as I mentioned at the start, is built around the ASSAP structure and the ASSAP team that's there already. So we've been working with them over the last, 10 months, identifying their training needs, bringing them up to speed, working through the application process with them, working through the actual mechanics of making an application and also the assessment process out on the ground. So at this stage now, we've applications received from each of the dairy processors, and they've all looked at target water bodies where they can focus their efforts to get a critical mass of farmers in. So they'll be starting with one water body and obviously moving to others where their supplier base is, but they've selected their initial water bodies. And we've also done a lot of engagement then over the summer months to try and promote the project and also, give information to farmers around the questions that they have essentially. How do they get into the scheme? What does it mean for them? The project then, I suppose we're doing an awful lot of collaboration with industry. Dairy Industry Ireland are a project partner, so they're an integral part of the project. They are represented on our operational group and our strategic oversight committee, and they're involved in all the decision-making processes around what we're putting in place here. We're also working with the sustainability leads of those dairy processors to integrate the Farming for Water EIP into their action plans. So making them, making the EIP part of those actions that they can get sustainability payments for. As I mentioned then, the dairy processors make up a lot of that ASSAP advisory team. So they've around 30, that number is increasing on an ongoing basis. So they've around 30 at the moment. And they're obviously then part of the support structures that we have in place. And we're also looking at Meat Industry Ireland and seeing where the meat processors can support the project. They want to play a part in the ongoing efforts to improve water quality. So we've had discussions with them as to how they can do that. And I suppose they've talked about the commitments that they can give up to and including providing additional advisors. So more boots on the ground to bring the project to life. And then outside the ASSAP project, we've mobilised ASSAP now. We're looking at other areas where we can bring in applications. So working with the likes of the OPW, the Department of Transport on nature-based solutions to manage runoff, the group water schemes, they're doing an awful lot of work on the ground. So leveraging that work and that network of farmers, and also with Uisce. And so any areas where we can, I suppose, bring in a collaboration if we're both doing works on water quality. Well, how do we work together to maximise the effort there? And now Eimear is going to go into a bit more detail on some of the measures in the scheme and the actual practical application of the project.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the measures that are available for funding to farmers, some of the mitigation measures where farmers meet the basic entry and eligibility criteria to get into the Farming for Water EIP. So just to give you a flavour of what's available for funding. As Mairead said, there's 43 different measures that farmers can potentially receive funding from the Farm for Water EIP. The basic, I suppose, entry criteria would initially be a BIS application in the current year. So a farmer has to have a department ID number, such as a herd number. Once you have that and you fall within the eligibility criteria, like the areas for action and so on, the basic entry requirement then would be a rainwater management plan. So basically the rainwater management plan, it follows on from the ASSAP assessment that the ASSAP advisors carry out. So each ASSAP assessment contains 3 parts. So there's the farmyard assessment, the land assessment, and the nutrient management assessment. So each of those 3 parts of any ASSAP assessment really form the basis for which measures will suit each farm, where the mitigation measures would be most suitable and most effective. So a baseline ASSAP assessment is critical, and that really forms then the basis for the rainwater management plan, where it's outlined on the maps and you follow the flow of water through the farmyard and through the farm. So you're really trying to identify where water flows, where it potentially picks up nutrients and sediment, and where those are potentially lost then to both the drainage network and the river network. And it's once you identify those, I suppose, within the farm, that you can really identify the critical source areas, the overland flow pathways, and where the mitigation measures then would be most effective. So you can see here on the table that's in front of you, all 43 measures are listed here. They're color coded. So generally this kind of lighter, I suppose, beigey color would predominantly be the source control measures. These will, I suppose, generally speaking, be more suited to the free draining soil type. So where nitrate is a critical nutrient of concern within that water body. So I suppose you have there one particular measure, the nitrogen surplus, multi-species swards and catch crops. They would be, I suppose, really key measures to address nitrogen surpluses and trying to reduce those on farms. There are other measures there to deal with pesticides, where pesticides may be an issue within a water body. So low drift nozzles, mobile drip trays, and water storage tanks. So those are simple measures that farmers can avail funding for, where there will be a water quality benefit from those. The measures there that are highlighted in blue, then they are the pathway interception measures. So these will be predominantly where you have phosphorus and sediment as the key issue within the water body. These are targeted towards the overland flow pathways and the delivery points. So there are things like the hedgerows with the earthen mound, where you would try to target these to intercept the overland flow pathways, spatially targeted buffers, which would be extended buffers within certain areas, again, to target those overland flow pathways and delivery points, tree planting within buffer zones, swales, management of critical source areas, water bars, you have culverts. So that there is quite a range of different measures there, and we'll have a look at some of those in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. The measures then that are highlighted in green, they would be the receptor measures. So here you would have funding for things like bovine exclusion from water bodies, ovine exclusion where that is causing a risk to the water body, solar powered electric fencers, pasture pumps, solar pumps, water trucks, vegetated bunded drains. So all of these measures are eligible for funding, but again, each one can only be selected as a result of your ASSAP assessment, and where between the ASSAP advisor and the farmer, you work together in conjunction to identify which mitigation measures will give the best result for water quality. You can see here the ones that are in white. I suppose that would be predominantly the bespoke measure that Mairead spoke about, where a farmer looks through these measures and they have another idea themselves that they feel could potentially work and give a benefit to water quality. There is potential then to come up with your own individualized measure. To do that, though, you would need the individual details of that proposal are required to be submitted, including the costings. But they definitely would be welcome, and definitely there is quite much flexibility within the EIP to look at those. And there were two other additions then for source control based on advisor feedback. Farmyard bucket and brush is one, and slurry testing is another. So the farmyard bucket and brush, I personally feel this could be quite an effective measure where it is used effectively in helping to keep that kind of grey water and the clean concreted yards clean and tidy. So if we just take a look at a rainwater management plan, what it entails, again, like I say, it's based on the ASSAP assessment. So what you're required to do is to have a satellite image of the farmyard. So if we take this example, really what you're looking at is quite a large derogation dairy farm. And what needs to be put on the map here is the flow of water through that farmyard, particularly if there is heavy rain or cloud bursts. So you're working the preferential flow pathways, trying to follow those to see where nutrients are potentially being picked up and sediment. Mandatory gap, cross-compliance and nitrates issues are separate to the EIP. So all baseline requirements have to be adhered to. And the EIP then can fund supplementary measures in addition to your baseline requirements. So if you take this farmyard, you can see the light blue arrows. That's the flow of water through this farmyard. So, there's some water which is going over clean concreted yards, but it's going out onto the field, which is fine. It's not impacting. But you do quite a large area of concrete here. And these would be clean yards, but they would be trafficked. So you would have machinery going over these. And these clean yards, particularly with high volumes of rainfall, have the potential to generate a lot of sediment. So in this particular case, the farmer is going to look at installing a 2-chamber farmyard settlement tank to help, capture that heavy sediment in the first chamber and have the outfall of that 2-chamber tank into a nature-based solution. So in this instance, this is the clean water outlet from the farmyard. This is where the farmer is hoping to put the farmyard settlement tank, and the outlet of that then will be into a nature-based solution, which in this case will be a willow bed. So the idea being that sediment will be captured in the first chamber, and then any potential dissolved nutrients that are there would be taken up from the growing willow trees. So then if we look at the land maps for this particular farm, this again, it's a derogation farm, but I suppose it's slightly unique in that the northern half of the farm is nitrate risky and the lower half of the farm is phosphate risky. So you have free draining soil up here and you have heavier soil down here. You have the open drain coming down along here, and this red line here is the watercourse. So in this particular case, and this is an example, I mean, there may be other measures suitable, but just as an example to give people an idea, in the nitrate risky section, multi-species swards can be funded. Water bars can also be funded, and generally the water bar to divert water from the farm roadway into sediment traps, again, just to reduce the volume of sediment and associated nutrients getting into open drains, streams and rivers. The other thing then, I suppose, would be, which is very important to look at, is the overland flow pathways. And, in ASSAP, we use the EPA PIP maps all the time. We use the PIP-N maps, the PIP-P, and the overland flow pathway and delivery point maps. So in this farm, you can see there is an extensive overland flow pathway. The darker colour here, the red, would indicate that, there's a higher potential for phosphate loss down here. There are quite a number of the red delivery points down here. So we would look to target what are called spatially targeted buffers in these areas. So it would be an extended buffer, which would be fenced off and potentially planted with native trees. And the idea there is to break the flow of the water and to reduce the volume of sediment and phosphorus getting into the drain and into the watercourse. So just to give you a worked example for that farm in particular, the funding that's available for the rainwater management plan, which is mandatory, the farmer will receive €250 for that as a one-off payment. The farmer's participation in that is critical, and the payment really is for the education and the participation in it. There's also a measure there for farmer training, where the farmer will receive €156 to attend a 3-hour farmer training course. The nitrogen surplus, which again is to reduce that the level of the nitrogen surplus on farm. So you're reducing the amount of nitrogen available for leaching. This in particular is focused at the dairy farms in the high PIP-N areas. So they will receive €250 as an annual payment to complete that. The spatially targeted buffers then, depending on the size that you go with, in this farmer's case, he's putting in 3 of them, €915 each. So again, that's a one-off payment. You can see here there are some that are one-off payments and there are other payments that are annual. The water bars, a farmer will get €213 per water bar. The sediment trap then is an annual payment because it will require maintenance, regular maintenance ongoing over the course of the EIP. So they receive €120 per sediment trap per year. The willow filter bed then, that one is on a per metre basis. So in this case, the farmer is going to do 70 metres in length of a willow bed. The willow bed is about 4 to 8 metres wide, €34 per metre for that. The 2-chamber farmyard settlement tank, the farmer will receive up to €6,500 there, depending on the final cost. If it's cheaper, the payment will be cheaper. So it will be based on receipts for that one, but the maximum is €6,500. The farmyard bucket and brush, farmers will receive funding there of €2,000. Again, so this is up to 50% of the cost of the bucket and brush. Again, if it's cheaper, that will be based on receipts. So you'll get 50% of the cost, and the funding will be, excluding VAT. The slurry testing then, this again be very beneficial. This is a one-off payment, and a farmer can avail of up to 4 slurry tests per applicant. So in this particular case, there's quite a bit of money there to be drawn down. But I suppose just to state that this really isn't an income support mechanism. It really is to get the effective mitigation measure in place and to receive funding to do that. But the measure has to be effective and has to, give a water quality benefit. So just very briefly, I'll just give you a brief overview of some of the measures in a little more detail. So the farmer training course, farmers will be given the option to attend the training course as part of the Water EIP, so it is voluntary. But the topics that will be covered in the training course will be relevant to the significant local water quality pressure. So if pesticides is the main issue, that is what the training will address. So it will be relevant to the water body. The nitrogen surplus, that really, that has been used in New Zealand for a long number of years. But it is a simple accounting system where you have the farm gate inputs of nitrogen minus the farm gate outputs of nitrogen. Your nitrogen surplus then is an indicator of the potential risk of loss of nutrients to the aquatic environment. So the farmer's payment here really to complete this nitrogen surplus, it's to allow for that discussion between the farmer and the advisor on how best to reduce the excess nitrogen in their farming system and what measures they can take on to reduce the nitrogen inputs and to improve the utilisation of their nitrogen inputs. Multi-species swards, as it says, that one is there. Obviously, with any of the measures in the EIP, there can't be dual funding. So if a farmer is availing of multi-species sward through the department scheme, it has to be separate ground to that. It can't be the same. We can't have dual funding with any of the department funded schemes. So whether it's the multi-species swards or acres or any different other EIP, there can't be dual funding. Similarly, with the catch crops, if a farmer is using that for the ECOT scheme, it can't be funded under the Farming for Water EIP. So it has to be separate ground. And that has to be very visual as well to a department inspector when they come out, that they can see clearly whether it's acres catch crop or EIP catch crop. They have to be completely separate. But catch crops is a really, really critical measure for nitrogen and sediment, soil structure for tillage farmers. So it's a really key measure. This is just 2 examples of the farmyard bucket and brush. Again, these are funded through the EIP, but I suppose the critical part of this is that they have to be used. So with all the measures in the EIP, it really is critical, the management of the measure. Once the measure is funded, they have to be managed going forward. So just some pictures of mounded hedgerows. So the mound really is to intercept overland flow pathways. So where in heavier soil type you have that potential loss through overland flow, a mounded hedgerow can help to slow down the flow, break the pathway, and reduce that risk and loss of sediment and phosphorus to water. The spatially targeted buffers would be similar. So this is an example of the overland flow pathways maps from the EPA and the delivery points. So in these farms, you would be looking to target your spatially targeted buffer here to intercept that overland flow pathway, and potentially a mounded hedgerow somewhere back up along that flow pathway as well. And this is just an example from a one-year EIP that myself and another ASSAP advisor, Paddy Fitzgerald in Limerick, worked on. So again, it was similar. We were targeting overland flow pathways with spatially targeted buffers. So the farmer here, this was unfenced spring, which is feeding into the main channel of the River Deal. And we asked the farmer to fence it out about 15 metres, about 20 metres long, and there was quite a slope there. And that farmer then planted it up with native trees. So I just want to say thanks to Terry O'Mahony from Kerry Agribusiness for supplying me with these pictures. This is a willow bed that has gone in as part of a pilot project through the Farm for Water EIP in Cathal Island. So just to give people an idea of what the willow beds look like, this one I think was about 80 metres or maybe 100 metres in length. It was dug out and levelled. So the willow bed has to be level from the top to the bottom and from the left to right. You want even dispersal of the water through the willow bed. This will be a wetland planted filter at the head of the willow bed just to capture sediment, planted up with wetland plants, and then overflow into your willow bed. You can't see in the picture, but that then was densely planted with willow trees. So in theory, if we can get that kind of grey water from clean concreted yards in farmyards, divert it into one of these, capture the sediment, and then the willow trees then will take up any potential dissolved nutrients that might be there. So fencing of streams and rivers and drains where they are where livestock are entering into them and causing an impact on water quality, these will also be funded. The fence has to be a minimum of 1.5 metres out from the top of the bank of the surface water. Livestock obviously can't graze inside it, and the fencing has to be up to the most relevant department specifications for fencing. So we want to reduce the number of livestock that are drinking directly and entering our watercourses, because you can see all the bank erosion and the damage that it causes. There is also potential then to do wider margins, 3-6 metre margins, both in grassland and tillage scenarios. And these images again are from the Deal EIP, where we funded these particular items, and again these are eligible for funding through the Farming for Water EIP. So solar powered pumps, nose pumps, and water trucks are all eligible to be funded through the Farming for Water EIP. So that's a very brief run through on it, Pat, and we're happy to take any questions or comments or feedback that people may have.
Okay, thanks very much. That was comprehensive, and I suppose it should generate quite a few questions in relation to what is eligible and maybe details around some of the eligibility. I see there's a question there. The first question that came in was, if you're in acres, can you avail of the EIP? I think you've already kind of alluded to that, but you might just indicate some of the issues around that.
Yeah. So if you're in acres, you can apply to the EIP, but obviously whatever acres actions you've already been funded under, you can't get dual funding on them. So catch crops would be one. If you're applying for catch crops through the Farm for Water EIP, the catch crop in acres and the Farm for Water EIP have to be completely separate. So there is potential to be in both schemes, but you really have to be mindful of where your acres actions are. We have some EIP measures that can go on acres parcels, but we have to, I suppose you'd have to kind of go through it on an individual basis really to be sure. But if you are looking to go into the Farm for Water EIP, you have to let the ASSAP advisor know you're in acres, and where the measures are. And then you can kind of go from there.
And I suppose a question there, if some of the research or if some of the farmer interactions come up with novel solutions, can they be brought in as measures on an ongoing basis throughout the scheme?
Yeah, there's great potential, I suppose, with EIPs because they're so flexible. So, you know, if a farmer has an idea and they discuss it with the ASSAP advisor, that, you know, they can apply for funding through the bespoke measure. But what they need is to have, you know, details of the proposal and costings for the proposal. But definitely there's huge flexibility for measures to come in that way. And, you know, with research and everything on some of those measures, we can get great data and hopefully come up with a lot more solutions and a lot more measures.
Yeah, and I suppose the ultimate aim is hopefully that we will get to a point where we will learn enough from this to have broader implementation of measures across agri-environmental schemes.
Yeah.
I suppose that'd be the history of the EIPs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's great potential with this, particularly if you can get research on a lot of the measures. You know, if we can figure out, you know, which mitigation measures deliver the best potential for, you know, taking out sediment, taking out nutrients, the correct size to have them, the correct location. You know, there's huge potential there. Yeah, definitely.
And I suppose the final question, and then I'll hand over, because there is a lot of questions coming in, I'll hand over to Cathal. The rainwater management plan, as you described it, seems to be the key to this. I know there's a lot of work and sometimes there's a bit of resistance to that level of intensive look at the farm, but it really is the key to establishing what needs to be done and where it needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do the application really without it. So the ASSAP assessment, baseline ASSAP assessment is crucial to walk the farmyard, to walk the farm and to look at the nutrient management aspect of it as well. You really have to go through each aspect to figure out which mitigation measures are going to work and to potentially give you a good result. So it is critical, absolutely, yeah.
Cathal, might hand over to you for some of the questions.
Yeah, Mairead, I suppose the question came in here. How does the process work? So if a farmer and advisor comes up with a plan, what happens then, or how long does it take to get approved maybe, and maybe then the payments come in?
Yeah, so the farmer and the advisor work together. They look where the risky areas are. They identify them, put them on their rainwater management plan. They have to fill out then a more detailed Excel just saying, I want, Eimear showed it there at the end, I want this measure, this amount of this measure, and it generates the figure. That's then submitted to the EIP team. And it's initially checked then for, I suppose, completeness, that you've submitted everything that you need to have, and then it's looked at by our scientist team to look at those measures. Are they the most appropriate measures for the pressures that are there? And that goes through that validation process. The double funding check has to be done then at that stage as well. So once that's done, then a letter of approval is sent to the farmer and the advisor. So the advisor is aware of what's going on. The measures are done and the verification is sent in to us. And on your approval letter, it will tell you what the method of verification is for each measure. That's sent in, and they can, I suppose, they can install a measure, 1 of 5, and claim the costs for that measure. You don't have to wait till you have everything done, because obviously with seasons and that, there's certain things you can do and certain things you have to wait to get a window of opportunity for. So they send in their evidence then, and it comes into our team and they're approved for payment, and then the payment will issue. The rainwater management plan, once it's approved, is paid. So you may be in an instance where you actually get that payment for that rainwater management plan before you even get your approval letter. But once we've approved the rainwater management plan, it's paid. So they'll get a kind of an early payment there before any measures are put in. In terms of the approval time that it takes, I suppose at the moment we're relatively early on in the project and everything had to be designed from scratch. So we have had delays. We've had feedback where we've had to change measures. That double funding issue and the previous question on whether you can be in acres or be in another departmental scheme, we obviously wanted to make that work. We didn't want to cut out anybody who was in acres or anybody who was in or who had applied through TAMS or any of those funding streams. We wanted to make sure that they could be brought into the process. That unfortunately has created an awful lot of work on our side, which has led to delays in the approvals. So we do have applications in there, and we do have a backlog of applications, but we're working through those. So we'll be hoping over the next 3 or 4 weeks that we get all those approval letters out so that farmers know exactly what they can do and can plan accordingly.
Yeah, and Eimear, there's kind of a comment in here, or a question, that I suppose down in the southeast and the south, there's big issues with nitrates at the moment, and a lot of the measures, I suppose, in the EIP are physical measures for phosphorus and overland flow, but there is some strong nitrate measures there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so I suppose it's much easier to tackle the phosphorus and the sediment, with physical measures. So it is actually easier to tackle those ones. But in terms of the nitrogen, the catch crops would be a critical one in a tillage scenario to mop up that excess nitrogen, that to reduce the potential for leaching. The multi-species swards is also very important to reduce the level of chemical input, and potentially with the plantain as a diuretic. So there's those, but then the end surplus would be a key one too. So the end surplus figure is through AgNav, and the data from that is coming from the Board B audit. So your Board B audit, like to have the data going into that, fairly accurate. You will get a reasonably accurate figure coming out then, but it is the data going in has to be correct to start with to get an accurate end surplus figure. I mean, in New Zealand, they've been using the end surplus figure for quite a number of years now. So it's really to try and raise awareness on it and bring it into discussion groups, and maybe have group reports for this so that farmers will be aware of it and can really try to tackle it, and to, to reduce the potential there for nitrate leaching.
And you just mentioned end surplus there, but it's a question, how has it been quantified? That's through AgNav, I think that's coming in, is it?
Yeah, it's through AgNav. So the data going into AgNav is coming from ICBF. So there's the milk sales, there's the livestock sales, then there would be all the data from the Board B audit. So really it's the quality of the data going in is critical. But there AgNav, that online platform, that is where the figure is being taken from.
Yeah, and question maybe, Mairead, for you. If the EIP plan has been submitted already, and maybe it's a year or two in, and somebody comes up with another idea that they want to add to it, is that possible?
It is possible, yeah. We can accommodate that. Obviously, we'd like everybody, from an admin burden point of view, everyone to apply once and apply for everything, but we understand that that's not always possible, so we can facilitate that.
Yeah, and is there a kind of a cap on the amount of applications or money a farmer can put in?
There's no cap on the amount of money at the moment. I suppose if there's a water quality benefit, an proven water quality benefit for those measures, we're generally accepting those measures. But the applications that come in do go through a rigorous validation process. So some applications won't be approved for everything, but it won't be, at the moment, certainly, it's not because they've exceeded a funding cap.
Yeah, and just kind of someone just wondering, could you clarify what a contractor mobilization fee is?
Yeah, so so when we looked at some of the smaller measures, we have I suppose our measures include a plant rate, but for some of the smaller measures, they wouldn't cover the cost of bringing an excavator onto a site. So we said we'd bring in a contractor mobilization fee. So it's literally to cover the cost of bringing a machine to site. So that's what that is there for.
Yeah, and another clarification as well. What's host farmer payment? Yeah,
so I suppose one of the key things that we see has been beneficial for the project is to have demonstration farms. So like that willow bed, the photos that Eimear showed there down in Kerry, it's very easy to talk about things. It's not as easy to pick up exactly what an advisor might be talking about or what we might be talking about when we say willow bed. So nothing beats seeing it. So we were asking farmers, well, are you willing to host farmers on your project, on your farm, to see these physical measures in the ground? And if they take up that option and we use the farm as a demonstration site, they get a payment for that inconvenience.
Yeah, super. Eimear, back to you again, a kind of a technical question based on mitigation. Somebody's asking a question around if a farmer has a drain on their farm that's going nowhere, can they cover it up? Or should they cover it up even?
Yeah, well, they fall in under landscape features through the BIS application. So if you are closing in a drain, it's actually under BIS that you need to open a new drain somewhere else on the farm. So there's that aspect, first of all. In the EIP, we would generally be more, we're happier to see open drains, because open drains, they have potential to mitigate nutrient loss and sediment loss. So where they're vegetated is actually better for water quality. So within a pipe, that can't happen. So generally speaking, open drains are positive. But it's obviously managing what's going into the drain is critical.
And there's even probably a piece there where you can put an open drain in that's not connected to water as a mitigation option.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can use open-ended drains, I suppose, where they're maybe not directly connected. But there's great potential with the open drainage network that we have to like capture sediment and also for uptake of dissolved nutrients. There's huge potential there.
Yeah. The training course, Eimear, what does that involve, or what's that going to look like? Is that a one-on-one or a group scenario, or how often do you see it envisaged? I know you're in the early days yet, but what does that look like?
So the training courses will be quite similar to the ASSAP farmer streamside events that have been held over the last number of years. It'll be groups of 25 to 30 farmers within a water body. Hopefully, if there's enough farmers within a water body, it will be done at that scale, or it can be broadened out if there aren't enough farmers within a particular water body. But it will be done in a group setting. Depending on the time of year, then I suppose over the winter, it potentially could be indoors. But ideally, it'll be out on farm beside a stream, and with the host farmer payment and the host farmer measure that Mairead explained, if ideally what we want is to have those training courses out on the host farmer's farm to show measures that have gone in place on that farm through the EIP, and just to show farmers what they look like and how they're working, how they function, how the farmer did what he did. And to get that peer-to-peer learning will be really critical. But we'll also look at the local water quality and what the issues will be there. And it'll be very relevant to what the issue is in the water body. So if nitrate is the key issue, then the focus in that training course will be on nitrogen. And equally, if it's pesticides or sediment and phosphorus, the key focus of the training will be on those measures.
And sorry, Pat.
There's I suppose a grouping of questions that are very important, I think, in relation to the who can apply, what can the role of other advisors be? Is it totally limited to ASSAP advisors? And I just think we might just look for a bit of clarity on that and where it might be going, and maybe examples of where other advisors have got involved in the process.
Sorry, go ahead, Mairead.
So I suppose the project was built on the ASSAP program and based on being the kind of final piece in the puzzle in the funding, to be the funding mechanism for those recommendations. So that's the core part of the IP. Now, we do recognise that there are other avenues that people might want to use. We're looking at the likes of the group water schemes and the group water scheme managers there. So they're doing a lot of work at the moment around these water quality measures in particular areas. They have networks of farmers there that they're working with at the moment. A lot of the measures are measures that we can fund. So we're looking at the potential to upskill those. A lot of them are very experienced in this field. They have the background required to be able to make those assessments because they're doing them on a daily basis. So we'd be looking at routing some applications through there. We also, within our own team, have project advisors. So there's a team of 10 there who are currently doing the validation and setting up the processes, but they will also be able to go out and bring in applications from farms. So if we get maybe a local authority contacts us and said, in our work, we have identified an area where supplementary measures would be very beneficial, our own team then can go out and make that application. I also mentioned there in the presentation about the community and leveraging community groups. So we have 5 community animator posts within the EIP team that we're currently evaluating at the moment. So they will be a role within those organisations who, again, will have an existing network, an existing focus, and have a water quality focus. So those advisors will also be bringing in applications to the scheme. So they're the kind of ones we're working at the moment. We're also, I suppose, looking at where Meat Industry Ireland can come in and what they can do in terms of bringing boots on the ground, I suppose, to bring in some of those applications. So we've set up the project around ASSAP, but now we're looking at, well, where can we go from there, and how can we bring in a wider team to try and install water quality measures through.
And there was some of that done with tillage advisors in
Exactly,
a trial this year.
Yeah, so some of the wider Teagasc advisory team through the tillage advisors came in to look at a catch crop pilot then that we had down in the southeast, and that worked very well.
Okay, there's a kind of a fairly key clarification, I think, in one of the questions we said on settlement reed beds in particular, but I suppose it applies to willow beds. Farmers should be aware there's some poor advice being given, and I suppose a particular reference to where farmers were being advised that soil water and silage effluent could be filtered through it. I think, Eimear, it might be appropriate to nail on the head that what we're trying to do here is make sure everything leaving the farmyard is as absolutely clean as possible, and that you're using it for further cleaning, but that there will be no provision for letting soil water or silage effluent down to be cleaned in these measures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have to be very, very clear about this, that we are not funding, we're not funding integrated constructive wetlands, number one, and we're not funding anything that already has to be collected under the nitrates rules and regulations and the GAP regulations. So for cross-compliance, all the cross-compliance issues that the department inspect on a regular basis, they are still, they're still mandatory and they're still a baseline. So everything that we're looking to fund is in addition to that, and it's supplementary to that. So for example, the farmyard, the two-chamber farmyard settlement tank and willow bed, that is not to deal with dairy washings, it's not to deal with silage effluent, and it's not to deal with slurry. It's only
Our soil water.
Or soiled water. Yeah, exactly. It's not to deal with any of those. Its only function is to deal with clean concreted yards that would be trafficked by machinery, capturing sediment and potentially associated nutrients with that sediment. But the baseline mandatory GAP requirements are still there. And if a farmer puts in a two-chamber settlement tank in a willow bed, it is to be managed as outlined in the guidance document. So, if in the future a farmer mismanages it or doesn't manage it correctly, it can still be, it will still be subject to, checks from the department or county council. So it has to be managed as it's been set out to be managed, and it will require management ongoing. So the first chamber of that settlement tank would have to be emptied every maybe 3 to 6 months, depending. If it's left too long, it can solidify. So down at the bottom, so you would want to empty that regularly. And you have to make sure as well then that the willow trees are coppiced on maybe a 3 to 5 year rotational basis. So they have to be actively growing to be constantly taking up those dissolved nutrients that are associated with any sediment in the settlement tank. So there is a bit of work in them. It's not a case that you put these in and you walk away, because, definitely then you will be leaving yourself open to issues down the line. So they have to be managed ongoing.
Just on that question as well, it's just there's kind of a bit of questions they're wondering about, I suppose, with increased regulation, increased inspection with county councils, fisheries, the department. Is everybody singing from the one hymn sheet as regards to nature-based solutions, or is there potential for somebody from one organisation to think this is not correct?
Yeah. Well, as much as possible, we're trying to work with all the different bodies, so like inland fisheries and the Department of Ag and the county councils. So we are meeting with them ongoing, and some of those meetings have to take place as well. But there is in principle, there is, I suppose, agreement to a certain extent, but there is skepticism, I would say, definitely about them. But I think this is the key part for the EIP, is for all of us to kind of get research on them. and to figure out exactly, you know, what is the efficacy of all of these measures and where is the potential for them in the future. But absolutely, there has to be agreement, all right, from each party. But like I say, you know, with the Department of Agriculture, they've been quite clear to us that, you know, in principle, this is all very good, but if it's mismanaged or not managed correctly, you know, then you are leaving yourself open. So it's all down to the management of them and what's going into them. It can't be like Pat said, you know, soiled water, dairy washings, silage effluent, or slurry. It has to be from the clean yards on the farm.
And Mairead, one for you, and a really important question is, will applying to the Waters EIP potentially bring on a department inspection?
No, I suppose it's a short answer. When you submit your rainwater management plan, it's solely the measures that we can fund. We don't have any information on compliance issues. Obviously, you'll have had your ASSAP assessment, and if the compliance issues come up and are discussed there, that's a confidential process. We don't see that information, and we don't want to see that information. So we're solely concerned with the measures that we can fund and the appropriateness of those measures.
There's a question that has been asked a few times, and it's been likened to the question, what is a tracker mortgage that used to be asked about 10 years ago, is what is a swale?
Eimear?
So a swale is basically a vegetated depression that can convey water from one area to another. So if you think of it, I suppose, maybe in a tillage scenario where you have sloped ground and you want to capture what's coming down that slope and you want to send it maybe to a sediment pond. You have a dry vegetation. You can have a dry or a wet swale, but we'll just go with the dry one for simplicity. So it's basically like a small depression. It's like a mini drain, a dry drain, but it's quite shallow and gently sloped. And it basically conveys the water a certain direction. So it can convey the water into a sediment pond or a sediment trap. So that's, I suppose, probably the easiest way to describe it. It's really coming from the suds, from the urban space that the swales are coming from. But they have great potential again to convey or direct your overland flow or your water or your sediment a certain direction so that you can then mitigate whatever it is, like whatever nutrient it is that needs to be captured.
And is there any trend developing from some of the applications coming in? Kind of, what's the most common issues that you're kind of seeing or that people are applying for?
Yeah, I suppose there's great interest in the willow bed, in fairness. And it's that visual piece again, like there's been articles done on it, and you know, there's good detail on the steps of the construction process. The challenge then is to make sure it's used appropriately. There's a lot, I suppose, of fencing off watercourses and removing animals from watercourses and the alternatives that we can fund through that. They're kind of the main things. Obviously in the nitrate heavy areas, then the nitrogen surplus measure would be a popular one as well. In terms of looking at what's impacting that figure and how that can be improved, both from a losses point of view and from an economic point of view.
I suppose one thing that we haven't dealt with, and it's kind of part of the training, and it's part of what is done with farmers as part of the process, is the whole issue of better management of nutrients to make sure that there's safer application, that there's less risk in the general farming practices as well. You might comment on that.
Yeah, that would be a key part, yeah, definitely, of the ASSAP assessment in general. So you're, you know, looking at the baseline soil fertility, using NMP Online for the various color-coded maps is a really great tool. And on NMP Online now, the pit maps are there, the flow pathway maps are there, the water courses are all on that. So it makes that piece much, much easier. You can, you know, at a glance identify where the low soil indexes are, where the high ones are, and where you should target your organic manures and your fertilizers going forward. I suppose sulfur is another key one to address as well. So definitely the nutrient management side is a huge aspect of it, and trying to have it as efficient as possible. And it also ties in with your greenhouse gases and the signpost side of things, particularly the nitrogen surplus. That very much ties in with what the signpost advisors are doing as well. So there is that collaboration as well, and that co-benefits there as well from all of that.
Yeah, so really, I suppose what we're focusing on in here is on the payments from the EIP, but it's part of that bigger process of managing and protecting from nutrient loss to the environment. Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it. It's 10:30, and thank you very much for a really good presentation. I think it has clearly outlined what's involved. Listen, I wish you the best of luck in terms of the rollout. It's going to be challenging. There's going to be more problems, and hopefully there's going to be a lot more applications coming in the near future as you move towards scale on that. So thanks very much for the presentations, and good luck with the work coming up. Thanks to Cathal. Just to say, next week we'll be joined by Shay Phelan, and Shay will be talking about sustainable tillage farming practices.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.